Good afternoon, everybody. Hello and welcome to our keynote discussion on managing risk to the research enterprise. My name is Justin Williams, and I'm a managing partner here at Optiv Security. I'll be the discussion moderator for today. We have an exciting discussion lined up to include retired four-star general and former CIA director David Petraeus and Dr. Kevin Gamache, our conference host. Gentlemen, let's begin. General Petraeus, you're a retired four-star general, former CIA director. You graduated with distinction from the U.S. Military Academy, and if I'm not mistaken, you're the only person in Army history to be a top graduate from both U.S. Army Ranger School and the Army Command and General Staff College. All of that on top of earning a PhD from Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs. I say all of that to ask you how you become interested in the field of academic security and counter-exploitation. In this case, specifically, we're referring to managing risk in the research enterprise.
Well, thanks for the invitation to participate in the conference, Justin. It is great to be back with Aggie Nation, even if just virtually, noting that I've been there for numerous truly memorable occasions in the past, including former President George H.W. Bush's 80th birthday free fall parachute jump, runs with members of Rutter's Rangers, events at the Bush 41 Library, teaching the Titans of Investing course, and even the 2010 commencement address. Second, it is a pleasure and a privilege to be on the virtual stage with you and Dr. Gamache, who has led and guided truly path-breaking academic research in the world of academic security, including, of course, considerable focus on countering potential foreign theft and exploitation of sensitive, cutting-edge academic research at a time when that is a particular challenge for our country and our academic institutions. The subject of exploitation and theft of breakthrough research has, of course, been a topic of increasing concern for those of us that have had an interest in various areas of national security, great power competition, international relations, and academia. And I've been in all of those worlds. It was particularly significant for me during my time as director of the CIA, during which we significantly increased our support of federal, state, and local law enforcement and investigative agencies that typically were overseen by our great partners in the FBI. And I should note that Director Mully and I worked very hard at that time to ensure that the special agents in charge and the station chiefs in the critical areas all worked well together. This interest has continued with my position as a member of the board of Optiv, which, as you know, Justin, since you're a managing partner in it, is one of the world's premier cybersecurity firms, and as a partner with KKR, one of the most prominent global investment firms, which owns about 110 companies around the world, a number of which are engaged in world-leading industrial infrastructure, manufacturing, cyber, and data technologies and processes, among others. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has put yet another spotlight on our research enterprise in the United States, showing what it's capable of when it's well-resourced, unified, and focused intently on a crucial mission. The incredible pace at which the new virus was studied and the unprecedented speed of development and testing of highly effective vaccines have been hugely impressive. Indeed, that effort reminds all of us how crucial the research enterprise is and how seriously important the intellectual property it develops is for our country and for our partners and allies around the world. And it's for this very reason, of course, that we must ensure that we adequately protect this invaluable resource. When I looked most recently into the great work that Dr. Gamache, A&M, and the team at Hoover Institution have done around the area of research security, in particular, the Global Engagement Risk Assessment and Management Program, which I'm sure we'll discuss further, I was very, very impressed. And thus I'm delighted to be part of a discussion about the contemporary challenges and about how to manage risk in this important area.
Dr. Gamache, aside from being a friend and a partner in the protection of our national security, you're a titan in the academic research community. Being the head of the Research Security Office at Texas A&M, one of the most extensive systems of higher education in the nation, with an annual budget of $4.7 billion, a system that generates more than $1.131 billion in research expenditures. You're also so gracious to host this industry-leading event. it's safe to say that you have a vested interest in academic security and counter-exploitation. What inspired you and your colleagues at the Hoover Institute to research and author the Global Engagement, Rethinking Risk in the Research Enterprise, which is a framework for protecting the research enterprise?
Well, Justin, first let me say how excited we are to have this conversation with General Petraeus today. His military service, and in fact his entire career for that matter, has been centered around managing risk and bringing large disparate groups together and uniting them with a common mission. And that's really what we're about at this conference. It's what we're about with the academic security effort. So General Petraeus, thanks a lot for joining us today. I've been in this position for over 10 years, and one thing that is clear to me now is that we face a threat unlike any we've faced in our history. It's real and it touches every aspect of the academy, but it impacts our research enterprise to the greatest degree. While we've all heard a great deal about this threat, especially during the past 5 years, the conversation has often been silent on how we can address the threat in a manner that is appropriate for our community. Global Engagement, Rethinking Risk in the Research Enterprise is intended to answer the question, what can be done? How can we solve this problem?
General Petraeus, when preparing for this discussion, I did a little research and took note that you oversaw the authoring of the U.S. Army's Field Manual for Counterinsurgency in 2006. This was at the height of the war in Iraq. And looking at it, it felt relevant to this conversation, particularly the idea of bringing large and disparate groups together to achieve a common goal. What lessons, if any, do you see from that experience or your vast body of work that could be brought to bear on the subject of managing risk to the research enterprise?
Absolutely. But first, let me just clarify, I didn't author it. I was privileged to oversee the production of it. Certainly did some considerable editing, but it was really a great team that came together, as is always the case in these kinds of endeavors. Indeed, I think the central lesson that we distilled during the drafting of the 2006 Counterinsurgency Field Manual, and then during the implementation of its ideas during the subsequent surge in Iraq, was that strategies for complex challenges require comprehensive approaches fused by organizational unity of effort. There are, in short, seldom single factor, single approach, or single organization solutions to difficult problems, despite what talking heads may offer occasionally on cable news networks. The effort in Iraq, for example, required a very comprehensive, unified civil military approach, not just of US and coalition forces, but of those of our Iraqi counterparts at all levels as well. It featured many so-called lines of operation, with the military's efforts to clear, hold, and rebuild areas and target irreconcilable leaders of extremist and insurgents organizations, complemented and eventually cemented by civil efforts to promote reconciliation, establish local and national governance, repair damaged infrastructure, restore basic services, rebuild local markets and schools, restore rule of law, gather intelligence, conduct public diplomacy, and so on. Just, again, innumerable efforts across the board. In essence, the significant security gains that were achieved by US coalition and Iraqi security forces were solidified by subsequent civilian initiatives, all of which had to be coordinated and synchronized by organizational structures and processes that ensured unity of effort. The same is true of the subject in which we're focusing in this session, the effort to identify threats to the research enterprise and to mitigate the risks of those threats in order to protect our most important research activities requires multiple lines of operation by many organizations working together, while observing all our legal authorities and restrictions, and all organized, overseen, and frankly driven by entities that represent the federal, state, and local investigative, law enforcement, intelligence, academic, legislative, and research communities, and others. And this has to be done in an era of renewed great power, strategic competition, in academic contexts that have historically have prided themselves on openness, widespread sharing, intellectual collaboration in research and innovation, seeking to improve human lives, industrial capabilities, and understanding. In the context of the past decade or two, however, we have seen innumerable, increasingly sophisticated and diabolically clever initiatives pursued by state actors, criminal entities, extremist groups, and even anarchists seeking to steal cutting-edge intellectual property developed in our most advanced research universities, national labs, private corporations, and others. The costs of these efforts have been described by various FBI and national security agency leaders as the greatest transfer of intellectual property in history. A recent example surrounding the ongoing pandemic was provided by a joint statement that the United Kingdom's National Cybersecurity Center, the US National Security Agency, and other relevant authorities released last summer regarding a hacking group allegedly linked to Russia stealing COVID-19 vaccine research. The statement also described a campaign of cyber attacks against government, industry, and academic targets conducting US, UK, and Canadian vaccine research and development. But of course, there have been innumerable other examples of efforts that have reportedly stolen everything from the plans for our most advanced stealth fighter jets to our most sophisticated cyber tools. And the theft has also included health and financial data and security clearance applications for tens of millions of Americans for use, presumably in counter-espionage purposes, among others. In sum, this is an extremely serious threat that is getting ever more challenging and that requires a very comprehensive response.
Dr. Gamache, you've been in this space for a long period of time. As we think about the threats, can you describe what some of the main threats and challenges around academia are, in particular within the research environment?
Yeah, let me take on the question of what are the challenges. The purpose of academic research at its most basic level is to seek truth and new knowledge. The things that are fundamental to our pursuit of new knowledge, openness, a willingness to collaborate broadly, a desire to push science to its limits, are the exact same things that make us vulnerable. The challenge then becomes, how do you protect the research enterprise? How do you mitigate the risk without crippling what has historically made us so effective? This is the fundamental challenge we face as a community. How do we protect what makes our research enterprise so effective without breaking it? We really need to be mindful of unintended consequences as we consider appropriate solutions to this problem. And this is a problem that is going to take a community to solve.
Thank you, Dr. Gamache. General Petraeus, just linking back to your former comments and the challenges that Kevin has laid out here. When you think about managing these risks, it's foundational, as we know. It's what we do, Optiv and other organizations. It's a key piece of what is measured and how we action the mitigation of these potential threats and risks. Given your vast experience and knowledge, can you guide us on what must be considered when we face these threats, particularly in this world of openness, our ability to try to accelerate research in this open environment?
Well, again, it's always critical to get the big ideas right in developing a strategy. And the biggest of the big ideas here for the threats to academic research we have discussed, and for the threats, frankly, that we focus on in Optiv's approach to cybersecurity, the big idea is one that I emphasized earlier, that there's no single response or product or app that can provide the security that is needed. Rather, what is required is a comprehensive approach. Given the enormous threats to the research enterprise, the overall community has to work together to implement that comprehensive framework to mitigate these risks. It has to be a very robust approach that develops resources, prioritizes, and executes risk management strategies. And that is absolutely imperative to the protection of the research enterprise. Beyond that, the big idea is, of course, that this work has to achieve unity of effort. The academic community is an essential part of managing the risk of the research enterprise and has to play a major role in an all-inclusive approach led by academic leaders in partnership with federal, state, and local authorities in the private sector. And the solution obviously should seek direction, support, and collaboration from the federal government, which should provide the overarching approach, but academic leaders need to lead the effort in the universities and research endeavors for which they are responsible.
I'd like to pick both of your brains on this next question. Why do you believe academia should lead the effort versus the federal government?
Well, again, if I can start here, I would just emphasize again that the overall effort should be shaped, should be led, should be pursued by generally federal authorities who are empowered by federal legislation, regulations, and policies. Again, a mix of law enforcement, investigative, and intelligence organizations. But the effort in the academic institutions and in the private sector research community should be led by the leaders of those elements. Clearly, they have to do this within the framework, within the guidelines and so forth established by those that oversee it truly comprehensively, noting that there are many, many threats beyond the halls of academia and beyond the research conducted by private sector businesses and corporations. But inside those entities, this has to be the equivalent of C-suite business for universities as it is for corporations.
Dr. Gamache, any perspectives there?
Yeah, let me start with a little bit of context before I answer the question, Justin. I think it's very important to understand that our values of openness, of collaboration, reciprocity, objectivity are absolutely essential to the research enterprise. These are what make us unique. They're what make us effective. And, I think it's very important as we consider what kind of solutions that we implement, that we shouldn't take any action that would place limits on those values. With that said, I think the academic research enterprise is unique because the things that make us effective are also what makes us vulnerable. And because of the significant risk we face if we implement solutions that negatively impact our effectiveness, it's in our own self-interest as a community to lead the effort in finding appropriate solutions to the problem. At the end of the day, it's going to be a team effort, but this is a charge that I think academia absolutely needs to lead.
Thank you, Dr. Gamache. And General Petraeus, you have spoken about this at length in many cases, but the balancing of risk with the appropriate level of action. When we talk about the vulnerabilities that Kevin has just mentioned, the very aspect of being open in order to accelerate research is the very vulnerability that we create, and it takes balance. I know you have a lot of experience in balancing those risks. Would you might share a few perspectives on how we might balance these challenges?
Sure, no, balance is absolutely critical. I mean, we see it in many, many different respects. I remember as the director of the CIA or even in the military, trying to achieve balance between, on the one hand, gaining the information that we needed to carry out activities that would ensure our national security, while still, again, balancing that with the laws and policies regarding privacy and activities within the domestic sector. In this case, Kevin mentioned the openness, collaboration, reciprocity, and objectivity that have always been fundamental to the success of the academic community and science and research enterprises. These qualities have been instrumental in breakthroughs in virtually all areas of research. Most recently, of course, this has been seen again in the record-breaking developments of highly effective COVID-19 vaccines. Keep in mind that the fastest vaccine developed previously was somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 years. I believe it was the polio vaccine. And in this case, of course, the vaccine was actually developed within weeks of actually the identification of COVID-19. And then the testing is what took the amount of time, but still to develop a vaccine, test it, prove it, adopt it, and produce it in less than a year is truly breathtaking. But imagine if the intellectual property of our research is compromised, whether stolen or altered, the integrity and validity of the information would be compromised. And therefore the production, what is results, the result of the research would be tainted, inaccurate, faulty, flawed. So we have to balance the risk without compromising development and collaboration on leading edge efforts. And that takes risk awareness, not risk aversion. That seems somewhat simple, it's rhetorical, but it tries to convey the kind of thought and consideration that is necessary. First, there has to be a full understanding of the protection level that's required. The community has to understand and control sensitive data. It has to include taking time to understand where that data resides and where it may be transmitted to or from, accurately identifying which of the data is sensitive or critical and which is less critical. What are the crown jewels? And this is not just from a best practices standpoint. Governance and compliance requirements must be taken into account when considering the access, transmission, and storage of critical data. If a research organization is, for instance, working with the Department of Defense, the data control requirements have to be met in addition to the requirements of the organization. This understanding, I think, is fundamental to fully recognizing the depth and breadth of any necessary risk management framework. The second consideration of balancing risk and collaboration is regarding the adoption of a framework that allows for the identification and mitigation of risks unique to the protection requirements and the enterprise. It has to be a robust structure that develops and prioritizes risk management strategies, as that is absolutely imperative to the protection of the research enterprise.
General, being a leader in risk management, I can't seem to think of many frameworks that have been used in a broad capacity. I know Dr. Gamache is on the line today, but any chance you know of any frameworks that might work for us?
Yeah, sure. Dr. Gamache's Global Engagement Risk Assessment and Management Program. I think that, the product of the kind of really serious analysis, debate, discussion, collaboration of the best minds in the field produced this. And I think that it satisfies the three main criteria that are effective in risk management strategies in this area. These criteria are that it has to be open. Openness carries the risk of intellectual property theft. But the research enterprise requires the ability to attract and integrate global talent. The benefits of that must be weighed against the risk for justification of a program's risk appetite. Openness, transparency, collaboration, and sharing, again, all critical elements of this. It has to indeed recognize and understand the program's research collaborators and funders. This is imperative to both implementing measures to reduce risks while also allowing for appropriate future collaboration. And then it has to use due diligence, a cornerstone of any risk assessment and management program, to be sure. And here, institutions and researchers must ensure that all participants in a prospective collaboration are clearly documented for all efforts. This also ties into the imperative for integrity. because for openness and collaboration to thrive, there must be sufficient analysis of all the stakeholders and participants. They have to be clearly identified, and they do have to be documented. Again, I believe that Kevin and the team that he's worked with at the Hoover Institution with Glenn Tiffert have accomplished just that. And I'm sure he'd be happy to explain that in more detail.
Dr. Gamache, high praise from a former four-star general and the former CIA director. Would you mind taking us through your perspectives on risk assessment and management?
Sure. My co-authors and I have proposed a risk management framework that we believe is uniquely tailored to the challenges faced by the research enterprise and the academic community. From the ground up, it incorporates the principles of due diligence, openness, risk management. It's designed to facilitate continued collaboration while being mindful of potential risks and mitigating those risks where possible. If you look at it holistically, the approach to these challenges is what we are proposing are 3 key steps for an effective global engagement risk assessment and management program. The first step would be to inventory your processes, your policies, and your technology solutions. This is crucial to understanding the risks and the opportunities related to your research program. Each of these play a critical role and can be used to formulate countermeasures. If a program focuses only on the technology side, for instance, this could still leave unmitigated risks in process and policy. The second step is something that we believe is critical, and that is to implement operational security. The Global Engagement Risk Assessment and Management Program outlines a process and a cycle for managing risk. The fundamentals include identifying assets and threats, analyzing gaps and risks, and then implementing countermeasures. So it provides a structured process for thinking about your threat. This is not a one-time process. It's a cyclical approach to ensure that risk is managed continuously. The final key step in utilizing the global engagement utilizing the global engagement maturity model. We thought it was very important to identify a capability or a process that would grow a program from initial capability to fully integrated program. Referring to the maturing of processes, it involves multiple levels of maturity, beginning at implementation and working its way up to a full optimized integration into all processes within the academic community. This global engagement maturity model helps identify which processes need to be nurtured to become a fundamental part of the organization and the overall risk management posture. A unified, holistic framework will be critical to sustained risk management across the research enterprise. And we think we've offered that framework in our publication. Accomplishing risk management with its 3 key steps has the benefit of being designed from the ground up to address the unique needs and challenges of the academic research community.
Thank you, Dr. Gamache and General Petraeus. I'm sure that the operational security or OPSEC aspects of that might be of interest and intriguing to you, given your prior operational security roles.
Indeed, OPSEC is part of everything we do, as we used to say, and probably still do, I guess, in various of the enterprises in which I'm privileged to be engaged. Again, operational security really is a cornerstone of any of these kinds of activities when you're engaged in risk assessment and risk mitigation.
And Dr. Gamache, can you help us with a perspective or a little deeper understanding of how this addresses the challenges, particularly, again, getting back to balancing the openness with security.
At its most basic level, I think what we have done is offer a process, a structured process for thinking about risk. This process provides researchers and administrators with the information they need to make informed risk-based decisions. It facilitates risk awareness. It eliminates risk aversion. It doesn't put limits on openness and collaboration. In fact, it provides a structured process so you can put in place mitigating measures that allow the research community to continue to operate in the manner that it has historically operated, and in a manner that has made us the best in the world, frankly, in the research enterprise.
Thank you, Dr. Gamache. General Petraeus, to you, sir. You have been involved in the implementation of architecture and frameworks probably the entirety of your career. When you think about implementing a framework like this in a group or an industry, think academia, any thoughts and guidance that we might need to consider?
Yeah, not everyone is aware perhaps that even in battlefields, even in combat, you are constantly conducting risk assessments before every operation. There is an actual formal risk assessment that is conducted. The effort is, needless to say, to identify all the potential risks that can possibly be conjured up. And then, most importantly, of course, to figure out how to reduce the risks, how to mitigate them in order to ensure that you do everything possible to keep possible casualties and damage and so forth down. For all of my involvement in the academic community over the years and various academic appointments, I would obviously defer to Dr. Gamache and his much more detailed knowledge of the academic and research enterprise. But from a general risk management standpoint, I guess identify a 4-step process that encompasses planning, preparing, executing, and then assessing. The planning stage brings together the various leaders, those who are going to implement a particular approach. In this case, they would come from the academic community and the research enterprise to ensure that all potential threats imaginable are identified, and then to discuss, obviously, the path forward in developing the various efforts to mitigate those risks. The preparation is the process of actually developing and refining the various initiatives to reduce the risk, to ensure the necessary organizational constructs, systems, and processes that will be employed, and to ensure that all of this is communicated effectively. The execution is, of course, just what the word implies. The actual implementation of the various risk mitigation activities, the conduct of the organizational constructs, coordinating mechanisms, processes, and so forth, with a recognition of the need, even during this, to both identify and very rapidly incorporate lessons, refine big ideas and processes, and determine the effectiveness of the approaches being implemented, which is really the province, I guess, of the 4th step in this particular process, which is assessment. In truth, you're doing this throughout the entire overarching process, but it's especially important after you have actually implemented the various risk mitigation measures, because it does help you identify how effective they have been, and more importantly, guide the efforts to identify and learn lessons, refine the tactics, techniques, and procedures that you've employed, tweak everything, improve it, and continue it. And so I think that would be the construct to employ in this kind of effort, which again is very standard throughout a number of different enterprises that do indeed perform risk management, not the least of which is, again, the military, including and especially even in combat.
General Petraeus, thank you. You know, Kevin, pulling on some of the comments and remarks by General Petraeus, when you think about it specifically within academia, by which you live in and day out, can you provide some perspectives on the challenges on implementing this within academia?
Sure. First, I think we need to accept the fact that there are those out there who will seek to illicitly gain access to our intellectual capital in ways that often lack transparency and violate accepted standards of research integrity. Second, I think we need to view the processes that we've outlined in our report as a means of protecting our intellectual capital, not putting limits on it. And then finally, I think we all need to concede that if academia doesn't address the threat we are facing, the solution will be legislated for us. And academia itself is in the best position to implement solutions that won't break the system that has made us so effective.
Kevin, coming back to you again, pulling on a thread here as we look down the road. Where do you see research enterprise heading without a significant paradigm shift? Right. I hear the legislative piece that you've mentioned there, but any perspectives if we don't make this shift?
I think it's clear that if we don't take action on our own, solutions that could have serious negative consequences will be legislated for the academic community. And, nobody wants that. But I really think the future is bright for the academic community. This conference is one example. I believe the community understands the challenges we face, and we're actively engaged in leading the effort to find appropriate solutions.
Thank you for that, Dr. Gamache. This is to both of you gentlemen. It's been a distinct pleasure to have you both in this discussion today. You're both titans in your own right, and we are certainly thankful and deeply appreciative for the thoughtful perspectives that you've both shared today. In closing this session out today, I'd like for any further thoughts or final thoughts that you might have on this subject.
Well, again, just thanks for the opportunity to be part of it. And then let me just emphasize one more time the importance of academia and the research enterprise to our national security and to our competitive strategic endeavors in a variety of different pursuits, from industrial and manufacturing to a whole host of other breakthrough areas in which the United States has led the world, but in which there is very serious competition at this point. Our research universities, our national labs, our private sector research enterprises are among our country's crown jewels. And as such, they're under constant threat, greater threat, really, from those who increasingly are competing with us in the current geopolitical context and who, in other cases, seek to undermine our system, our security, and our values. We have to recognize that these threats are increasingly serious and require robust, holistic, comprehensive responses to mitigate the risks of those threats without overly impeding the sharing, collaboration, and openness that have typically characterized our efforts and our successes in the research arena.
Dr. Gamache, any final thoughts or perspectives?
Yeah, Justin, I think we as a community have a great opportunity at this time to create a new paradigm. we've come a long way as a community in the last 5 years towards recognizing the threat we face and understanding what we can do together to solve the problem. But I also think academic security is a team sport. We need to lead this effort. We can't do it alone. But we also need our federal and industry partners on the field as we move forward in solving this problem.
Thank you, Dr. Gamache. And to our conference attendees today, thank you. Thank you for engaging in our discussion today on managing the risk to the research enterprise. And a final special thank you to retired General David Petraeus and Kevin Gamache for joining us in this session today.
Thanks very much, Justin. A privilege to be with you and Dr. Gamache.
Thank you, General.